The wind howled through the empty streets as Emily pulled her tattered coat tighter around her shoulders. The night was unforgiving, cold enough to bite through even the thickest layers. Not that she had much to shield herself from the bitter chill. She had been walking for hours, her feet aching from exhaustion, but she had nowhere to go, no home, no family, just the worn-out backpack on her shoulder, and the memories of a life that had unraveled far too quickly. She stopped outside a brightly lit hotel, the golden glow from the lobby windows spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, guests laughed, clinking glasses, wrapped in warmth and comfort. It felt like a world so far from her own that she might as well have been staring at a different universe. Her stomach growled, and she hesitated, knowing she had no money, no reason to be here, except for the desperate need to rest, even if just for a moment. Emily shuffled closer, trying to absorb the warmth from the hotel's entrance. Just as she was about to move away, the door swung open and a man stepped out. He was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and a kind yet tired face. His name was Daniel, the owner of the hotel. He paused when he saw her, his eyes scanning the exhaustion in her expression, the way her fingers trembled from the cold. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated before nodding quickly. "I'm fine," she lied. Daniel wasn't convinced. He had seen enough people in his lifetime to know when someone was struggling. His hotel was known for luxury, but he had built it with a heart for people, not just for business. And something about this woman, standing before him, lost, exhausted, and barely holding on, stirred something deep within him. "Wait here," he said before disappearing inside. Emily shifted uncomfortably, ready to leave before someone called security on her. But before she could take a step, Daniel returned with a keycard. "Take this. Room 207, he said, handing it to her. Emily blinked in disbelief. I don't have any money," she stammered. "You don't need any," Daniel replied. "Just get some rest." Tears pricked at the corners of Emily's eyes. She wanted to refuse, but the warmth of the lobby was too tempting, and the kindness in Daniel's voice was something she hadn't heard in a long time. With a grateful nod, she took the key and stepped inside, the heat of the hotel wrapping around her like a long-lost embrace. Upstairs, she unlocked the door to room 207. It wasn't the biggest suite, but it was more than she could have dreamed of. A soft bed, a clean bathroom, and a window that overlooked the city lights. She ran her fingers over the sheets, almost afraid that if she lay down, the moment would vanish. But exhaustion won, and for the first time in months, she slept without fear. Downstairs, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the old photograph on his desk. It was a picture of his daughter, who had passed away years ago. She would have been about Emily's age if she was still alive. Maybe that's why he felt compelled to help, because in another world, if things had gone differently, his daughter could have been the one in need of kindness. The next morning, Emily woke up to the smell of fresh coffee. A knock on her door startled her, and when she opened it, a hotel staff member stood there with a tray of breakfast. "Mr. Daniel asked us to bring this to you," the woman said with a warm smile. Emily sat by the window, eating slowly, savoring every bite. She had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a human being, to have someone care. She spent the next few days at the hotel, helping out where she could, cleaning tables, carrying luggage, anything to repay Daniel's kindness. She didn't want to take advantage of his generosity, and working gave her a sense of purpose. One evening, as she wiped down the hotel's front desk, the doors swung open and a man stepped in. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried an air of quiet authority. His name was Jonathan Carter, a wealthy businessman whose name carried weight in the city. But there was something different about him tonight. He wasn't here for business or pleasure. He was here for something else. His sharp eyes scanned the lobby until they landed on Emily. Daniel looked up from behind the counter. "Mr. Carter, how can I help you?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned toward Emily. "Are you Emily Dawson?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with something unspoken. Emily froze. Her heart pounded against her chest. She hadn't heard that name spoken with such certainty in a long time. How did this man know her? I don't know what you mean," she said cautiously. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. "This will explain everything," he said. Emily hesitated before slowly taking the paper. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it, and as her eyes scanned the words written inside, she gasped. Daniel watched as Emily's face drained of color. Whatever was in that note had shaken her to her core. Jonathan gave her a small nod. "I've been looking for you for a long time," he said softly. Emily felt the room spin. 1,000 questions raced through her mind. Who was this man? Why had he been searching for her? And what exactly did he mean by a life-changing gift? Before she could speak, Jonathan added, "Everything you thought you lost is about to change." Emily clutched the paper in her hands, her breath shallow. She had spent so long believing she was invisible, forgotten by the world, and now, standing in a hotel lobby that had become her temporary refuge, she was faced with a stranger who held the key to a past she had tried to leave behind. Daniel exchanged a look with Jonathan, sensing that whatever was happening was bigger than he could have imagined. The air in the room felt charged, the weight of an untold story pressing down on them. And then, Jonathan spoke again. "You're not who you think you are, Emily." Emily's heart stopped, and just like that, her world would never be the same again. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the paper, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The words on the page blurred as she tried to make sense of them. She looked up at Jonathan, her breath shallow. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. "I know you have questions, and I promise I'll answer them. But first, I need you to trust me." Trust. That was something Emily had learned not to give so easily. Life had stripped her of that luxury. She had been lied to, abandoned, and left to survive on her own. And now, a man she had never met stood in front of her, claiming to know something about her, something that could change everything. Daniel, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Jonathan, maybe you should start by telling us how. You know Emily, she deserves that much." Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "I've been searching for you for years, Emily. Or should I say, Emma Carter." Emily's breath hitched. That name. It was unfamiliar, yet something about it sent a strange chill down her spine. She shook her head. "That's not my name. My name is Emily Dawson." Jonathan's expression softened. "That's the name you've been living with. But it's not the one you were born with." Emily's legs felt weak, and she reached for the counter to steady herself. This was impossible. She had no family, no past worth remembering. She had been on her own since she was 16, scraping by, forgotten by the world. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket again, this time pulling out an old worn-out photograph. He handed it to her. Emily hesitated before taking it. Her eyes widened. It was a picture of a little girl, no older than 5, sitting on a man's lap. The man had the same sharp features as Jonathan, the same piercing blue eyes. And the girl, she had the same eyes too. Emily's hands tightened around the photo. "Who is this?" she whispered. Jonathan swallowed hard. "That's you, and the man holding you was my brother, your father." Emily felt like the ground beneath her had vanished. She searched Jonathan's face for any sign of deceit, but there was none. He was telling the truth. "But how could that be? My father," she echoed, her voice cracking. Jonathan nodded. "You were taken from us when you were just a child. My brother and his wife searched for years. The pain of losing you, it destroyed them. Your mother never stopped hoping you'd come back. But my brother, he never forgave himself for losing you." Emily's mind raced. It was too much to take in. She wanted to believe him, but how could she? Her earliest memories were of bouncing between foster homes, of people who never stayed, of being told she had no one. Daniel, seeing the turmoil in her eyes, spoke gently. "Emily, what if this is true? What if you do have a family out there?" She shook her head. "No, that's not possible. If they were looking for me, why didn't they find me sooner?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Because someone didn't want you to be found." Silence filled the room. Emily's fingers dug into the edge of the counter. "What are you saying?" Jonathan sighed. "After you disappeared, the case went cold. No leads, no evidence. But recently, I uncovered something. Records that had been hidden, altered to make sure no one would ever connect the dots. Someone took you, Emily, and they made sure you stayed lost." A cold chill ran through Emily. She wanted to dismiss it, to walk away and pretend this conversation had never happened. But deep inside, something told her he was right. Jonathan continued, his voice softer now. "I don't know who did this or why, but I do know one thing. Your real family never stopped looking for you. And if you let me, I want to help you find out the truth." Emily stared at the photograph. Again, the little girl in the picture. Was that really her? Had she really been stolen from a family who had loved her? Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know if I can believe this," she whispered. "I don't know if I want to." Jonathan nodded, understanding. "I know it's a lot, but you don't have to decide right now. Just give me a chance to show you the truth." Emily looked at Daniel, searching for guidance. The man who had given her shelter, who had shown her kindness when no one else had. He simply gave her a small nod. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you," he said. Emily took a shaky breath. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crack, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay beyond them. But one thing was certain, her life was about to change forever. Emily sat in silence, the weight of Jonathan's words pressing down on her. If what he said was true, then everything she believed about her life was a lie. She had spent years thinking she was abandoned, forgotten, but now she had a family that had never stopped searching for her. Her fingers traced the edges of the photograph, the little girl staring back at her like a ghost from a past she didn't remember. The thought of being stolen, hidden away from the people who loved her, it was too much. And yet, deep down, something about it felt right, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Jonathan could see the conflict in her eyes. "Emily," he said gently, "you don't have to do this alone. If you're ready, I can take you to see your mother." Emily's breath caught. Her mother. The word felt foreign, like something belonging to someone else. Could she really face a woman who had spent years grieving for a daughter she didn't even know existed? Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, just know you're not alone," he said. Emily looked at him, then back at Jonathan. Her whole life had been a fight for survival. Maybe it was time to stop running and finally face the truth. She took a deep breath. "Take me to her." Jonathan nodded, relief flashing across his face. Within an hour, they were on the road, the city lights fading into the distance. As they drove toward a quiet neighborhood just outside of town, Emily stared out the window, her heart racing with every mile. When they finally pulled up in front of a small house with warm lights glowing from inside, Emily's hands started to shake. She wasn't sure if it was fear or hope, maybe both. Jonathan stepped out first, giving her space to breathe. "She's inside," he said softly. Emily hesitated, then pushed open the car door. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the house, each step heavier than the last. Before she could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. She looked older than Emily had expected. Grief and time etched into her face, but the moment their eyes met, Emily knew. This was her mother. The woman gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking. Something inside Emily shattered. The walls she had built for years crumbled, and before she could stop herself, she nodded. A sob escaped the woman's lips as she rushed forward, pulling Emily into her arms. The embrace was warm, desperate, filled with years of longing and loss. Emily didn't know how to react at first. She had forgotten what it felt like to be held like this. But then, as her mother whispered her name over and over, she let go. She let the pain, the confusion, and the fear melt away as she held on to the woman who had never stopped loving her. Jonathan wiped his eyes, stepping back to give them a moment. Daniel, who had insisted on coming along for support, watched with a soft smile. After what felt like forever, Emily pulled back slightly. "I don't remember anything," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother cupped her face gently. "That's okay," she said through her tears. "You're here now. That's all that matters." For the first time in a long time, Emily believed it. She had spent years thinking she was alone in the world, but she wasn't. She had a mother, a family, people who had never stopped looking for her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still questions, still wounds that needed time to heal. But for the first time in her life, Emily wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't just a homeless woman searching for a place to belong. She was Emma Carter, and she was finally home.